I'm convinced that Facebook hates me. It's just kicked me off mid-live stream. So I'm going to try this again. If it fails again, I may give up. So, as I mentioned in the previous minute and a half of me talking, basically today I'm delving into or taking a step towards the world of controversial topics on the internet, and I'm going to discuss fat shaming today. And the reason that I've decided to discuss this is because of a video that we saw from someone that we love and follow very closely in the fitness world called Emma Story-Gordon. So shout out Emma, great video. I've just watched it just before pressing record, and I think the messages that Emma shares in that video are very, very close to what we believe, and it's a movement towards viewing things objectively, viewing things from a data perspective, and removing or trying as much as possible to remove the emotional weight behind something that is very, very strong when it comes to obesity or when it comes to being overweight. And so fat shaming as a concept is something that is gathering a ton of steam in the world, not just fitness, in the world in general. And so I wanted to give my opinion on it, and also a way that I think is a slightly better way of dealing with the problem. But also some stuff that you maybe wouldn't expect us to think, I guess. So I'm going to discuss it as two parts. Obviously, the first thing is fat, or being overweight, or having body fat. Or as Emma discusses, I'm a person and I store excess energy, or I have stored excess energy, rather than associating your personality with being fat. So there is no doubt about it that being overweight or carrying excess body fat carries a degree of health risk. You can argue about that as long as you want, but when it comes down to it, there is a heightened risk to your health from being overweight. And there are costs to obesity as a concept outside of just personal, because it has economic, financial consequences and social consequences. And really, if we look at the actual data, what that suggests, why is obesity becoming an increasing problem? It's mainly because of the availability of food, or the availability of calories. There's a standard example used. If you were to go back 50, 60 years and try and eat a cupcake, the effort that you would have to go through to eat that cupcake is huge compared to now. I reckon I could eat a cupcake, and if you know me personally, you know how quickly I eat. I could eat a cupcake there's no cupcakes anywhere near me, but I reckon I could acquire and eat one within 5 minutes. And that the availability of that creates an inherent issue, which is obviously that things are so available. I don't have to go to any effort to acquire these very palatable, easily digestible foods that are obviously also very calorie dense and designed to increase my consumption. Like the combination of sugar and fat in a chocolate covered muffin or cupcake tastes amazing, and I could eat loads of them. And that's one of the problems with the availability of foods like that. And that's coupled with something called hyperbolic discounting, which it sounds really fancy, but basically it just means that I can say today that in the future I want to be shredded. But when it comes to someone presenting a cupcake to me, I can't correctly order those things in terms of the value to me of the cupcake right now feels greater than the value of something in the future, even though really I know the cupcake's kind of directly contradicting my goal, but I can't correctly order them. So I hyperbolically discount. I give more weight, more value to the cupcake now, and fuck my chances of my long-term goal because I hyperbolically discount. And obviously there are other aspects to this. There's a lot of emotional connection when it comes to food, when it comes to body image. And a lot of people, if they're overweight, and they have been for a long time, it's because of emotional connections to food rather than because of the simple fact of they don't manage their calories or they don't track in MyFitnessPal. There's a lot more going on here than just that. And I guess fat shaming has arisen because it's society's reaction to an increasing issue, or it's society's reaction or some people's reaction to a way of dealing with a problem that is growing in momentum, and we kind of see it. It's even being presented on the news occasionally that the obesity crisis is placing a greater stress on the NHS in the UK, and also just in other economic senses. So I think that my feelings on the overweight element or the fat element of this statement is that body image by and large should be a choice, and I don't think it's up to anybody to say you should or shouldn't look a certain way, or you should or shouldn't be a certain way. It should be a decision. Of course, when it comes to being overweight, there are costs to other people, in the sense that if by being overweight you create health problems in later life, and that places a greater burden on the health service, you're placing a greater cost on the taxpayer than if you weren't overweight. But that's kind of boring, and no one really cares, and you're probably thinking shut up, Johnny, stop talking about economics. So the fat aspect of it is, there's the overweight element or the fat element is actually a very complex thing. We can't just simply say like, you shouldn't be fat, because there's a lot going on there and it's a very complicated issue. And I think to just say, they're fat, that's stupid, why are they fat, they shouldn't be fat, is a very reductionist, very overly simplistic way of looking at things. So the shaming element, I think, is what really brings the controversy around this whole thing, because shaming is inherently like making somebody feel bad because they're overweight. And speaking from experience, because I used to be overweight when I was younger, believe it or not, you may or may not have heard that before, but I spent a good part of my youth, I kind of use this as an anecdote, until I was 16, my weight in stone matched my years in age. So I was never like health risk overweight, but it was definitely an increasing problem. And I experienced, although it wasn't called it at the time, I experienced some of the shaming, I experienced the bullying, I experienced the shit that comes along with being overweight or looking different to your friends and peers. And so I can say from experience that shaming can work. And for me, it did work, because the bullying and the negativity that I experienced caused me to have this like, right, I've had enough of this now. I'm going to go do something about this. And I suppose that's why I'm speaking to you with a Propane, where is it there? With a Propane fitness logo. And the reason that I'm working in the fitness industry is because of those experiences. So while I look on it as like that was a really nasty part of my life, in many ways, it actually created a lot of positivity in my life in later life, because I got made fun of. And I think in some ways, being made fun of for me moved me out of this like self-pity, like, oh, woe is me, I'm fat, I'm overweight, I don't know what to do, to like, right, I'm pissed off about this now, I'm going to do something differently. So there's that aspect of it. But that's also, shaming is just complete roll of the dice. Like, I've worked with clients and I know people who have experienced the shaming side of things, and it's worsened how they feel about themselves. And you'd probably expect that, like being shamed or having somebody take the piss out of you because of how you look you can definitely see how that would make you feel worse. And so it's basically a chance of whether or not that's going to help that person or not. And just because, I think this is really key, this side of it, is that just because like you or I or whoever you are watching this, whatever state you're in, just because you have a certain relationship with food, just because you feel a certain way about calories, just because you feel a certain way about yourself, doesn't mean that someone else's reality is the same. Like, there's a lot of complexities around addiction, if addiction is how you want to describe it. And food and calories and eating and certain foods, it's a chemically bolstered relationship. That when we eat lots of food, it feels nice, and we get a chemical response from that. And we attach that, and the more that cue and reward is reinforced and done over and over again, the more that we get, the further down that rabbit hole we come, or we end up rather, the harder it is to unpick that and end up in a different situation. And so it's all very well to go, that person's fat, that's stupid. But for them to get out of that reality is a lot of work, and it's not as simple as people who've never been in that situation may ever think or believe. And so the other thing, as I mentioned before, is that some people are dealing with emotional connections to food, and shaming can sometimes accelerate that spiral. So if they already feel bad about themselves or their body image, and food is part of that relationship, and you make them feel worse, then you're pushing someone further down a rabbit hole. And it creates this like sense of hopelessness and this sense of, I can't do anything about this, I am fat. And as Emma said in her video, people start to create an association with it. And that's what I had when I was younger, I'm Johnny and I'm the fat one. I'm the fat friend. I'm the guy who's overweight. And that can definitely make things much, much worse. So all of that said, that's kind of my thoughts on fat and shaming. How would we at Propane Fitness recommend that it gets fixed? So I would argue that it's not a motivation problem, despite what some people may think. It's not a discipline problem. It's not a genetics problem. It's a problem with what we term as, or what we call in our coaching programs, as the 3 I's. So those I's are the 3 things that everybody needs to succeed, regardless of whether you are severely obese and looking to get healthy, or whether you are a bodybuilder looking to step on stage. So the 3 I's are information, integration, and individual accountability. So the information that somebody needs when they are severely overweight, let's say in an example, they need to become less severely overweight, is different to the information that a lot of the fitness industry needs. And that's part of the problem, is that some of the fitness industry kind of perpetuates itself. It serves the people who are already fit, already in shape, and it pushes that population further, which is great. That's just a market working and providing the service that people want. But the information that someone who is obese and who has no idea where to start, it needs to be so simple and it needs to be relevant to them. And shaming somebody, instead of providing them with information, it doesn't help. We should be seeking to give them the information that they need to just make one step, gain some forward momentum, move forward in one way. If I had that information when I was overweight, my journey would have been a lot quicker than it was. It took me years to kind of figure this stuff out because there's so much noise. If you imagine being someone who's outside of the fitness industry and stepping in and realizing how much stuff there is around, like how many different opinions, how many people argue with one another about different things, it's so difficult to even kind of order things into position. So giving them simple information that is relevant to them, it would be step number one. And then integrating that information. So just saying like, oh, well, this is what maybe you need to do this with your lifestyle and make this change. It's like, how do they actually go about doing that? And I'm talking about they, like, please don't never take offense to that idea. Like, speaking from personal experience, I remember reading a men's health magazine, and thinking, right, there's a workout program, there's a diet plan. How am I going to do that? I'm not really sure. And I remember feeling like there was a gap between like the information that I was reading and how I was actually going to go about doing that. And so a lot of people who are stuck with their weight or have an issue with their weight are stuck with an integration piece. They don't know how to actually get started with it. So that's part number two. Giving them information, integrating it, and then individual accountability. I don't care who you are, how advanced you are, or how just getting started you are. You need somebody to hold you accountable. And making people feel worse about themselves, instead of just holding them accountable and saying like, how about you try, if you want help, here's some information, here's how to integrate it, let me hold you accountable for a while and help you, is going to create a very different reality to just taking the piss out of them because they don't look how you think they should look. So I guess my approach or my recommended change in this situation, speaking from some experience, speaking from a reality that was pretty painful and trying to solve the problem myself, is if we shift over to a view of educating rather than a view of shaming, it would change it drastically. The last thing that I want to talk about, which is maybe a little bit painful for some people to realize, is that the idea of shaming, like if you find yourself ever taking the piss out of someone or shaming somebody, it's almost always because you're hiding something in yourself. And so the people who are like the strongest advocates of like, let's make fun of fat people, or let's make fun of anybody for that matter, they're often doing it because there's something about them that they are trying to cover up or make themselves feel better for. And that, I guess, it comes from a place of being dishonest. And this applies to both sides of the spectrum. Like if you're watching this and you're overweight, and you're part of this flame war of getting cross because people are making fun of you, or you're part of the group who are making fun of people who are overweight, both sides of the equation have a lack of clarity and almost lying to themselves. If you're overweight, that's a fact. That's not an emotionally centered issue. As Emma says in her video, like that's just information. If you're told by a medical professional that you need to lose weight, for example, there shouldn't be like, oh, how dare you? It's just data. It's just information. And so not lying to yourself about it and doing something about it, if you want to, will end the argument anyway, rather than getting involved in the argument. And if you're part of the group of people who are adamantly like making fun because you think that shaming is the way to fix the problem, look at your own stuff first, and look at your own issues first before just offending somebody or taking the piss out of someone because they don't look how you look. 9 times out of 10, in fact probably 10 times out of 10, if you're shaming somebody else, it's because there's something in your life that you're not happy with. So look at that first, and then seek to educate and assist rather than just shaming because it makes you feel better. So, bit different to my usual videos. Quite an emotional one for me, or quite a painful one for me, because obviously it's relating to a journey that I went through when I was younger that ultimately leads me to where I am today. So hopefully I've managed to talk about this without pissing off anyone. And hopefully this opinion and this thought, my thoughts around this help. So if you know of anyone who needs to hear this message, or you think would benefit from this message, or really disagrees with this message, tag them below. Let's start a discussion about it. If you like what I've said, please give me a like, comment, share. Let me know that I'm not just speaking to myself. I think Yusuf's shouting at me from outside, so I need to go see him. We'll speak soon.